When the suspicions first crept in, they didn't arrive with thunder. They slipped into the quiet corners of my life like shadows that refused to leave. My husband's smile grew thinner, his eyes darted away more often, and the warmth in our home turned lukewarm. He worked late, or so he said, though the hours stretched longer than usual. His phone began living face down on the table, buzzing like a caged insect I wasn't allowed to touch. I told myself stories to keep the ache away. Stress at work, maybe a new project. But perfume lingered on his jacket one evening, floral and sharp, nothing like mine. That was the first crack in the picture frame of our marriage, the kind of crack you can't unsee once light pours through it. The distance between us widened in small ways. He stopped holding my hand when we crossed the street. He flinched when I reached for his shoulder. Even the silence between us became a presence of its own, heavy and watchful. And I, foolish or hopeful, pretended not to notice, clinging to the belief that the man I married was still there under the excuses and late-night showers. But the truth has a way of bleeding through lies. One night, when I kissed him on the cheek, my lips brushed against a smudge of lipstick that wasn't mine. Crimson, mocking, a brand new language of betrayal painted on his skin. He laughed it off, muttering about a careless hug from a colleague, but his voice trembled. And in that tremor, my doubts hardened into certainty. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I only stared at him, my heart breaking cleanly like glass. In that moment, I knew the story of my marriage had changed forever, and the ending would not belong to him. My name is Claire. I'm 30 years old, and I've been married for 7 of those years. When I said I do, I believed it meant forever, through storms and sunshine, through laughter and silence. I was the kind of wife who ironed his shirts before meetings, who left little notes in his lunch bag, who thought loyalty was the strongest thread a woman could weave into a home, but forever started changing shape the moment little red flags began fluttering at the edges of our life. At first, they were small enough to dismiss. He began coming home late, shrugging it off as deadlines, meetings, and stress. I wanted to believe him, wanted so badly to believe him, that I ignored the hollowness in his smile when he walked through the door. His phone became a stranger in our house. Once, it used to sit on the nightstand, unlocked, buzzing with messages from friends and coworkers. Now it lived in his pocket, face down, guarded like a secret. If it chimed, he would leave the room to answer, his voice low, his back stiff, and then came the scent. I noticed it one Tuesday evening when he hung his jacket by the door. It wasn't my perfume, the soft vanilla I always wore. No, this was sharper, heady, floral, like the kind of perfume a woman sprays before she goes out to be noticed. I buried my face in the fabric, pretending to inhale the comfort of him, and instead breathed in betrayal. I told myself it meant nothing, a colleague's hug, maybe, an accident. I clung to excuses like lifelines, desperate to keep the world I'd built from collapsing. But every night, the distance between us stretched wider. He no longer reached for my hand when we crossed the street. His eyes slid past me at the dinner table, as though looking too closely would expose his guilt. My marriage, I realized, was a glossy photo frame hiding a cracked glass inside. From afar, it gleamed with the image of perfection. But up close, the fractures were spreading, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold the pieces together. The final blow came one evening when I leaned in to kiss him on the cheek. My lips brushed against a smear of lipstick, deep red, glaring, unmistakable. It wasn't mine. It would never be mine. And in that single stroke of color, my suspicions became truth. I wish I could tell you I confronted him right away, demanded the truth, and got my answers. But betrayal is rarely so simple. It gnaws at you in whispers, makes you question your own eyes, your own instincts. For weeks, I lived in that twilight space between denial and certainty, Every time I found courage, he snuffed it out with a practiced smile or a dismissive laugh. One night, as he slipped into the shower after working late, I scrolled through the crumpled receipts in his pockets. A hotel bar, 2 glasses of wine charged to the same card he swore was only used for gas. Another time, his Uber history betrayed him. Rides not to the office, but to a residential street across town. I memorized the address, my pulse thundering as I traced the lines of the map with my finger. I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to my oldest friend, Melissa, the kind of woman who could sniff out a lie before it was fully formed. Together we watched, waited, pieced together a puzzle I didn't want to finish. And then we saw her. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't some nameless woman passing through his life. She was worse. She was familiar. A coworker I'd met at one of his office parties. The one who'd laughed a little too hard at his jokes. Who'd complimented my necklace while her eyes never left him. My blood went cold the moment I recognized her face, leaning across the cafe table to brush crumbs from his cheek. The world tilted sideways. My knees nearly gave out, as though gravity itself had shifted with the truth. In that instant, my marriage wasn't just broken. It was mocked, paraded in public under the bright lights of humiliation. When I confronted him that night, he didn't even flinch. "You're paranoid," he said, throwing his tie on the couch. "She's just a friend. God, Claire, you make up stories in your head. Do you hear yourself?" His voice was sharp enough to cut, but it was his calmness that gutted me. How easily he could twist my pain into madness. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there in silence, memorizing every word, every lie he let drip from his mouth. In his eyes, I was weak, a woman too afraid to walk away. In his mind, I would swallow his excuses like bitter medicine and carry on. But as he turned his back and disappeared into the bedroom, something inside me hardened. I stared at his shadow on the wall and whispered to myself the vow that would change everything. If he thought I'd stay silent, he forgot who I really was. For days I walked around like a ghost, every step heavy with betrayal. My friends, the few I trusted enough to confide in, told me to leave. "Claire, you deserve better," Melissa said, squeezing my hand across the cafe table. "Pack your things, file the papers, and be done with him." Her words made sense. Logic told me to cut my losses, salvage what dignity I had left. But there was another voice inside me, colder, sharper. Leaving meant he would remember me as the wife who cried, who begged, who walked away quietly while he carried on with his mistress. No, that wasn't going to be my story. If he wanted a performance, I'd give him one he'd never forget. Eddie, night. While he snored beside me with the arrogance of a man who thought he'd won, I lay awake, lit by the glow of my phone. Google became my accomplice. Revenge on cheating husband. Best pranks to expose affair. How to humiliate a liar. The results swung between ridiculous and dangerous. Itching powder, public confrontations, sugar in the gas tank. I scrolled, unsatisfied. None of it felt sharp enough, poetic enough. Until one night, rummaging in his nightstand for an extra charger, I found it. A sleek, discreet bottle tucked beneath papers, hidden away as though it were contraband. The label was worn, but the meaning was clear. Lube. My hands froze around it, my pulse hammering. I stared at that bottle for a long time, and then a thought flickered in my mind. A thought so absurd, so wicked, it almost made me laugh. What if pleasure became punishment? What if the thing he reached for in secrecy turned into the very trap that exposed him? The idea burned through me, growing hotter, sharper. Revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be violent. It would be sticky, humiliating, unforgettable. The next day, while he showered, I made my move. I emptied the bottle carefully, my hand steady despite the wild rush in my chest. In its place, I poured thick industrial adhesive I'd bought under the pretense of fixing a broken chair. The glue oozed slowly, sinister, filling the plastic with silent promise. I screwed the cap back on, wiped the rim clean, and returned it exactly where I'd found it. The bottle looked innocent, waiting like a loaded gun on the nightstand. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, staring at the drawer as though it could see me. My reflection in the mirror looked different, my eyes sharper, my mouth curved in a smile I didn't recognize. I leaned closer to my reflection and whispered the words that sealed my fate, soft as a prayer, sharp as a blade. That Friday, he walked into the kitchen with his tie already loosened and his eyes darting everywhere but mine. "I'll be working late tonight," he muttered, grabbing his keys a little too quickly. Big. Project deadline. I forced a smile so sweet it could have rotted teeth. "Of course," I said softly, kissing his cheek as though I believed him. My heart thumped in my chest, not from fear but from anticipation. Let him think I was blind. Let him think I was still the fool. When the door closed behind him, I moved quickly. I set the living room light to a faint glow, just enough to make the house look occupied from the street. Then I slipped into the shadows of the guest room, my phone charged and camera app open. I had rehearsed this moment in my head all week. The trap was set. All that remained was patience. Hours crawled by, every tick of the clock stretching into eternity. Then, finally, I heard it. The faint click of the front door, the whisper of hushed laughter. Her laugh. I knew it instantly. Light, practiced, like a melody rehearsed too many times. They stumbled in together, his voice low, hers bubbling with excitement. My stomach twisted, but my hands remained steady, clutching the phone like a weapon. They climbed the stairs, footsteps muffled on the carpet. Every creak of the floorboards above my head felt like a drumbeat of betrayal. I imagined them kissing, fumbling, eager, and I waited. Waited for the moment that would shatter everything. Through the thin air, I heard her giggle again, followed by the distinct sound of the nightstand drawer sliding open. My pulse roared in my ears. I could see it in my mind, the sleek bottle being pulled from its hiding place, his hand curling around it, clueless of what awaited him. The bed upstairs squeaked, the room filled with muffled voices and laughter that quickly edged into nervous giggles. I crept closer to the bottom of the stairs, my camera already rolling, the little red dot burning like a signal flare. The trap was no longer a plan. It was happening. And in that suspended heartbeat, with betrayal thick in the air and justice humming in my veins, I smiled to myself. The stage was set, I whispered, lips barely moving, eyes fixed on the ceiling where my marriage was collapsing in real time. Now, let the curtain rise. At first, their laughter floated down the stairs, muffled and careless, the sound of two people convinced they were untouchable. I could almost picture them, tangled in sheets, smug in their little stolen paradise, but then silence. A silence that cracked open into the sharpest, most delicious chaos I'd ever heard. It started with a gasp. Hers. High-pitched, shrill, like a kettle screaming on the stove. Then came his voice, panicked, strained. "Wait, don't move. Don't. Ah, God, it's not coming off." The bed thudded against the wall as they writhed, their movements clumsy and frantic. Her laughter had evaporated, replaced by wild shrieks. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, one hand covering my mouth to hide the smile, the other steady as a surgeon with my phone camera. Upstairs, the struggle grew louder, their panic swelling, like a symphony of shame. "Get it off! Get it off!" she screeched. I can't," he yelled back, his voice breaking with terror. "We're stuck. What the hell is happening?" The sound of sheets tearing, skin pulling, the bed frame squealing against the floorboards. It was grotesque, absurd, and yet so poetic. They had glued themselves into their own nightmare, and every thrash, every cry was a verse in the song of their undoing. My heart didn't ache. It soared. My thoughts weren't sorrowful. They were sharp, gleeful daggers. Funny, I thought. How quick pleasure turns to prison when the mask slips. How fast desire turns to disaster when the glue sets in. Her shrieks pierced through the walls, spilling into the night. A dog barked next door. A porch light flicked on across the street. The neighborhood was waking to the symphony of their disgrace. Then his voice, ragged and desperate, bellowed, "Don't call anyone! Don't you dare call anyone!" But it was too late. I heard the click of a phone line from somewhere down the block, the urgent voice of a neighbor reporting domestic screams. The siren of justice had already been dialed. Minutes later, I saw the first flash of red lights reflecting against the living room window. The distant wail of sirens grew closer, closer, until it filled the street. I pressed my back to the wall, the glow of emergency lights painting the curtains in crimson. Upstairs, the chaos had reached fever pitch. Downstairs, I allowed myself the smallest, coldest smile. The trap had sprung. And now, the whole world would see. The sirens cut through the night like a promise, and then the front door rattled under the fists of men trained to break into burning buildings. "Fire department! Open up!" one barked. I didn't move. I simply set my teacup down on its saucer, pressed record on my phone again, and waited. When the door swung open, boots thundered across the hardwood. Flashlights swept the hall, catching on family photos, polished furniture, every piece of a home that was never what it seemed. Then the noise from upstairs hit them. Screams, thrashing, pleas that made no sense. 2 firefighters exchanged a look. "We've seen cats stuck in trees," one muttered, shaking his head. But this? They took the stairs 2 at a time, axes slung over their shoulders expecting danger. What they found was so much worse. I stayed below, listening to the stunned silence that followed the door slamming open. And then, laughter. Unbelieving, disbelieving laughter from men who had likely thought they'd seen everything. "Ma'am, stop pulling!" one of them shouted, over the chaos. "Sir, quit thrashing, you're making it worse." The mistress's sobs rang out like sirens of their own. "Help us, please, I can't. Oh God, it hurts." Her voice cracked into a wail. My husband's voice followed, broken, frantic. "Do something. Don't just stand there. Get us apart." I carried my tea into the living room, the porcelain warm between my palms, and sank into the armchair facing the staircase. From where I sat, I could see shadows flailing against the ceiling, the firefighters moving about in clumsy, shocked motions. I lifted the teacup to my lips, calm as Sunday morning, while my phone captured every second. Upstairs, chaos bloomed. The bed frame screeched across the floor, a lamp shattered, furniture toppled as they tried to maneuver the glued-together mess of skin and shame. Orders barked back and forth. "Bring the solvent! Careful with the scissors!" The sound of metal clanging against tools filled the air. My husband's voice tore through the house, ragged and high-pitched, stripped of all dignity. "Don't cut anything important. Please, God, don't cut anything." One firefighter sighed, audibly. "Man, I've pried people out of wrecked cars with less resistance." And then came the hiss of chemical bottles being uncapped, the harsh smell of solvents drifting down the staircase. I could almost see them pouring it carefully, gloves squeaking, hands steady. But the glue was strong, and so was the panic. The mistress sobbed louder. My husband cursed and begged, and the firefighters grunted under the weight of the absurdity they'd been dragged into. Finally, a scream split the night, raw and primal, echoing through every wall of the house. My husband's scream. The scissors had come out. The chemicals were burning. The humiliation was complete. I set my cup down gently, leaned back, and thought to myself, sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom. Sometimes it only needs a bottle of glue. The next morning, sunlight streamed through my curtains as though nothing had happened. But in my phone lay proof that everything had. Hours of footage, the panicked shrieks, the firefighters' exasperated commands, my husband's voice breaking into pitiful begging. I replayed it once over breakfast, the steam of my coffee rising in time with the sound of his humiliation. Then, without hesitation, I pressed upload. Anonymous account. Private server. Within hours, the video had found its way to the corners of the internet that devour scandal like candy. By afternoon, it was everywhere. Couple glued together, the headline screamed. Memes sprouted like weeds. My phone buzzed with notifications I never acknowledged. At his office, whispers turned to roars. By Monday, he was suspended pending professional conduct review. The man who once strutted into boardrooms with polished shoes and an inflated ego now hid in the shadows, his face stamped across every group chat. The mistress fared no better. Her coworkers laughed behind her back, friends whispered, neighbors stared. The woman who once tossed her hair like she owned the room couldn't buy groceries without hearing the word glue hissed behind her. She became a punchline, and, in her shame, she vanished from social media entirely. I, meanwhile, was busy. My lawyer already had the divorce papers prepared. I slid them across the table with a steady hand, the ink of my signature bold and unshakable. There were no tears, no pangs of regret, only a delicious sense of freedom. Every dotted line was a door closing, every legal phrase another brick laid in the wall between me and the man I once thought was my forever. And yet, late one evening, I heard the knock. Hesitant, pathetic. I opened the door just enough to see him standing there, disheveled, broken, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. His eyes were wet, rimmed red. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Please, don't leave me." For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy as lead. Then I let the door swing wider, not to invite him in, but to let him see the empty boxes stacked behind me, the life I was already packing away. I met his eyes one last time, my voice calm, firm, final. "You glued yourself to her. I just made sure the world saw it." And then I shut the door. The click of the lock was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The moving truck pulled away just as the sun dipped low, painting the city skyline in strokes of orange and rose. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, boxes stacked behind me, the air buzzing with a kind of quiet that felt like freedom. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was light, expansive. Mine. I unpacked slowly, savoring the ritual of choosing where each piece of my new life would belong. A photograph of me and Melissa laughing on a beach day went on the counter. Fresh flowers, sunflowers my favorite, stood tall in a glass vase. No reminders of him, no shadows of what once was. In the bottom of one box, I found the velvet pouch that had carried my wedding ring all these years. I opened it, stared at the dull circle of gold that once symbolized promises he shattered without hesitation. It felt cold in my palm, meaningless now. I walked to the kitchen window, slid it onto the sill for one last look, and with a flick of my wrist, tossed it into the trash. No ceremony, no tears, just an ending. But tucked in another box, I found the thing I had chosen to keep, the empty glue bottle. Its weight was nothing, but the meaning was everything. I set it on a shelf above my desk like a trophy, a reminder not of pain, but of the moment I reclaimed myself. Every time I glanced at it, I remembered the sound of his panicked scream, the sight of flashing red lights, the taste of tea on my tongue as I sat calm while his world unraveled. Betrayal used to break me. It hollowed me out, made me doubt the very ground I stood on. But standing here, in my own space, breathing air untainted by lies, I realized betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had built me. It had stripped away illusions and left behind a woman, stronger, sharper, untouchable. One evening, as I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the city lights flicker awake, I whispered it aloud, just for me. A truth sharp enough to cut, calm enough to heal. He wanted to bond with someone else. I just made sure he stayed stuck. And when the world came to watch, I finally walked away free. And for the first time since the cracks began in my marriage, I didn't just breathe. I soared.